warning me like something ancient was whispering a truth I was never meant to hear, and yet my heart kept pretending everything was all right because that is what I had done for 10 long years, believing in a love that kept slipping through my hands like water, refusing to stay, refusing to warm, refusing to save me when I needed saving the most. I remember standing in the kitchen staring at the faded wedding photo on the fridge, thinking about how young we were back then, two people promising forever without knowing what forever even meant, two people holding on to hope because hope felt easier than honesty, and I kept telling myself he loved me because that lie felt safer than the truth that was growing darker every day inside the shadow of our home. He came home late that night, quieter than usual, his eyes cold like winter roads that never melt, and he looked at me in a way that made something deep in my body freeze. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but the words got stuck because the truth was already speaking, louder than anything I could say, the truth that something terrible was about to happen. The next morning I woke up early, planning to surprise him with breakfast, thinking maybe our marriage just needed warmth, maybe love could still be rescued, but love cannot be rescued from someone who has already decided to destroy it. And as I stepped outside toward my car, trying to ignore the unease crawling up my spine, I never saw the man hiding behind the vehicle until the cold, sharp sound of metal exploded into the air. The world turned red, then black, then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, I was trapped inside a place that did not feel real, a coma, a silent prison where voices came like distant storms fading in and out, and I could hear doctors saying she might not make it. I could hear nurses whispering her husband is heartbroken. But somewhere deep inside I knew he was not heartbroken, because he was the reason I was lying here, the reason my life had been ripped apart on the morning I tried to save a marriage that had been dead for years. Time felt strange in the coma. Sometimes it felt like minutes, sometimes like lifetimes, and in those lifetimes my mind replayed every sign I had ignored, every moment he pulled away, every lie he told, every late night that smelled of betrayal, every bruise on my spirit that I tried to heal with forgiveness. And I realized I had been living with a stranger who wanted more than freedom. He wanted me gone. Then came the day everything shifted again, the day I heard my sister's voice trembling with truth, telling the detective that something felt off, telling him that my husband had collected a large insurance policy only weeks before my attack, telling him that neighbors saw a suspicious car circling our home, telling him that my husband was not reacting like a grieving partner but like a man waiting for something to be confirmed. And it was that fear in her voice that reached the deepest part of me, the part that refused to die, the part that pulled my spirit upward, screaming, wake up, wake up, wake up. And I did. Slowly, painfully, but I did. I woke up to a world that had moved on without me, a world where my husband had already started spending money that was supposed to be given only if I died, a world laughing in bars, posting online, living free while I lay between life and death. But the moment I opened my eyes, the moment I breathed that first heavy breath, I felt something stronger than pain rise inside me, something burning and fierce like wildfire, justice. The doctors were shocked, my family cried, and the police took notes, because my awakening changed everything. Now I could speak, now I could tell them the last moments before the attack, now I could describe the figure waiting by my car, now I could explain my husband's behavior in the weeks before the anniversary, how he had been colder, how he had been secretive, how he had spoken to someone on the phone late at night thinking I was asleep, how he had told me we should revise our estate papers as if preparing for some final chapter one never agreed to. Evidence began to unfold like rotten pages of a book that had been hidden for too long. The hitman's messages, the money transfer, the instructions describing my routine down to every detail, and the most chilling part was the message that said, make sure it looks like a random attack because she always wakes up early on special days. I felt something inside me break, but also something rebuild, because the truth was finally brighter than the lies that held me for years. They arrested him at work and people whispered in shock, because he always played the role of the perfect husband, the supportive partner, the gentleman with polite smiles. But darkness can wear polite smiles too. Darkness can hold your hand at dinner and kiss your forehead goodnight. Darkness can sleep beside you for 10 years and still plan your death without blinking. The trial became a storm that the whole town watched, reporters outside the courthouse, cameras capturing every tremble in my voice, every step I took as I entered the place where I would face the man who vowed to love me then tried to silence me forever. When I walked inside the courtroom, every sound faded except the pounding of my heart, and when I saw him sitting there in a suit, pretending to be innocent, pretending he was the victim of lies, pretending he still had control over the narrative, I felt a fire rise inside me, a fire born from survival, a fire born from every breath I fought for in that hospital bed, a fire that would not let me be afraid anymore. The prosecutor asked me to speak and I stood there facing the man who tried to erase me, and I told the world what happened the morning of the attack, how I felt him pulling away for years, how the shadows in our home grew heavier, how the silence between us became dangerous, how love had become a cage with no door, how trusting him nearly cost me my life, and how waking up from coma was the moment I was reborn, not as his wife but as my own protector. He looked at me with eyes that once fooled me, but now I saw them clearly: emptiness, danger, selfishness, nothing that resembled. When the judge read the words guilty on all counts, I felt my knees weaken, not from pain but from release, the release of 10 years of silence, 10 years of pretending, 10 years of carrying the weight of a marriage built on illusions, the release of knowing I survived both the attack and the man who orchestrated it. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into the warm American afternoon, feeling the sun on my face like I was touching life for the first time, and even though my scars still ached, even though my body was still healing, even though nightmares still visited my sleep, I knew I was free, I knew I was alive, I knew the story that tried to end me had become the story that saved me. I moved to a new city far away from the place where the ghosts of my marriage lingered, and I started rebuilding from scratch, learning how to breathe again, how to trust again, how to live without fear, leaning on the strength that carried me through the coldest moments, learning that survival is not just waking up, it is choosing to rise again and again even when rising hurts. There are nights when the memories return, nights when the shadows remind me of what I escaped, nights when my past calls out like an echo trying to pull me back, but I do not answer anymore because I am not the woman who went to sleep before her 10th anniversary, believing in a love that was already planning her death. I am the woman who woke up, I am the woman who fought back, I am the woman who walked into a courtroom and looked her nightmare in the eyes without trembling, I am the woman who lived. And now this story is no longer about him, it is about me, about survival, about truth, about the power of waking up, not just from a coma but from a life you did not deserve, a life built on lies, a life that tried to end you before you even had the chance to discover your own strength. I tell this story so others can see that darkness can live in familiar places and danger can wear a loving face, but strength can rise from the deepest wounds and hope can grow from the coldest nights, and no matter how close death comes, no matter how deep you fall, as long as you breathe, there is always a way back into the light. And this time the light is mine. But even after the trial, even after the sun touched my skin like a promise, the world did not suddenly become soft again. Healing was not a straight line, it was a battlefield where every memory felt like a ghost pulling me backward, where every shadow on the street felt like danger, where every voice behind me felt like someone following me, and I had to learn how to walk again with courage instead of fear, holding on to the truth that I survived for a reason. There were mornings when I woke up drenched in sweat, believing I was back in that cold, silent coma, trapped between life and death, unable to speak, unable to scream, unable to escape the echo of footsteps approaching my hospital bed, like someone waiting for me to slip away. And I had to remind myself over and over that I was free and that he could never touch me again, that his darkness could never find me again, because justice had locked him far away from the world he once controlled. I moved into a small apartment with thin walls and wooden floors that creaked at night like they were whispering stories of the lives that came before mine, and even though it was not perfect, even though it was lonely, it felt like the first safe place I had owned, the first quiet space where I could hear my own heartbeat without fear that someone was listening for it to stop. I spent hours sitting by the window watching the city move, the lights changing, the people passing, the world living its life, without knowing my story, without knowing the battles happening inside my chest. And sometimes I wondered how many others walked these same streets carrying invisible wounds, how many smiled while hiding scars, how many slept beside people who wished them harm, how many fought silent wars in the dark. One evening, as rain tapped against the glass like soft fingers trying to get in, I finally opened the box of memories from my marriage, the photos, the letters, the rings, the small tokens of a love that never truly existed, and as I held each piece I felt the weight of every lie settle in my palms, every broken promise, every moment where I begged myself to believe in a man who was planning my funeral instead of our future. I did not cry at first, I thought I had no tears left after everything, but then something inside me cracked and a flood of emotions poured out: pain, betrayal, heartbreak, anger, all of it rising like a storm that had been waiting for the right moment, and I let myself feel it. All without holding back, without hiding, without pretending, because for the first time in my life I was safe enough to break open. Days turned into weeks and I started therapy, not because I was weak, but because survival had left marks inside me that needed tending, wounds that needed truth, hands that needed healing, reassurance. And my therapist told me that trauma does not disappear, it transforms that healing is not forgetting but learning how to carry the past without letting it crush you, and at first I did not understand, but slowly the meaning began to settle inside me like warm light filling an abandoned room. I began writing in a journal every night, pouring out thoughts that had no place to rest during the day, writing about the fear, writing about the anger, writing about the strength I did not know I had, writing about the woman I was becoming, a woman who no longer whispered, a woman who no longer apologized for surviving, a woman who could stare into darkness without letting it swallow her whole. There was a day when I needed to return to the hospital, where I woke up from the coma because part of me felt trapped between the memory of lying helpless and the reality of being alive and walking and breathing again. And when I stepped into that hallway, something inside me trembled, like the walls remembered me, like the floor knew the weight of my broken body. And as I entered the room where I once slept between worlds, I felt a wave of cold fear, but also a powerful truth. I was no longer that helpless woman. I was no longer the one who was hunted. Myself. I started volunteering at a women's shelter because I wanted my pain to become purpose. I wanted my survival to light someone else's darkness. And when I heard the stories of the women, their stories of betrayal, stories of violence, stories of escape, I felt the same ache in my chest that I once carried, and I sat with them, listened to them, held their hands, and told them that survival is not just living, it is choosing to rise again every single day, even when your heart feels heavy and your spirit feels bruised. Sometimes at night, when the city grows quiet, I walk along the streetlights, letting the glow guide me forward, and each step reminds me of how far I have come, from the woman who almost lost everything on the morning of her anniversary to the woman who now walks fearlessly into the future. And I realize that freedom is not just a place, it is a feeling, a breath, a choice. And yet there is one moment that remains carved in my memory, the day I returned to the courtroom long after the trial ended to read my victim impact statement again, not because I needed the court to hear it, but because I needed myself to hear it. And standing in that empty room, I read every word slowly. Shame, they are proof that I lived through the storm and came out standing. And as long as my heart keeps beating, as long as breath stays in my lungs, as long as the world keeps turning, I will keep telling my story, not as a victim, not as a warning, but as a light in the dark for anyone who thinks they cannot rise. Because if I rose from the edge of death, then so can they, so can you, so can anyone who decides that survival is worth one more breath.